The Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences had seen many species walk through its crystalline corridors over the past millennium. Tall, graceful Etherians with their translucent skin gliding silently between classes, the clicking and chattering as they calculated complex equations in their heads. Even the massive, slow-moving titans from the heavy gravity worlds had found their place among the academic elite. But never had they enrolled a human. Director adjusted his bioluminescent patches nervously as he reviewed the file on his holographic display. The data was almost impossible to believe. This creature came from a planet designated as Deathworld Class 7, a classification so extreme that most species considered it uninhabitable. The atmospheric composition alone should have been lethal to any intelligent life form. Oxygen levels that would cause cellular damage to most species, radiation from a young star, extreme weather patterns, and gravitational forces that would crush the bones of civilized beings. Yet somehow this human not only survived on such a world, but had developed space travel and applied to join the most prestigious academic institution in the galaxy. Sir, his assistant, a delicate and whose gossamer wings fluttered anxiously, approached his desk. The human transport has docked at Bay 17. Shall I escort the creature to orientation? His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep concern among his people. No, I'll handle this personally. We must be extremely careful. If the reports about their world are accurate, this being could be incredibly dangerous. The Academy had spent weeks preparing for this arrival. Medical teams were on standby in case the human's presence somehow contaminated the carefully controlled environment. Security forces had been briefed, though what they could do against a creature that survived on a death world remained unclear. Special atmospheric controls had been installed in the designated quarters to accommodate the human's bizarre biological requirements. As made his way to the docking bay, he passed groups of students huddled together, their voices hushed with a mixture of excitement and terror. Word had spread quickly through the Academy's social networks. The Crystalline Collective had run probability calculations suggesting a 73% chance that the human would accidentally kill someone within the first day. The Psionic Brotherhood had reported sensing violent thought patterns from the incoming transport, though that could have been attributed to their natural fear response. The docking bay doors hissed open with a pneumatic sigh that seemed to echo through the vast chamber. Steam from the environmental adjustment systems created an eerie fog that swirled around the feet of the assembled greeting committee. Stood at the center, flanked by medical personnel in full protective gear and security officers trying to look casual while keeping their weapons within easy reach. The transport ship itself was a marvel of primitive engineering. Where galactic standard vessels were smooth, organic curves designed for maximum efficiency, the human craft was all sharp angles and brutal functionality. Burn marks along its hull spoke of atmospheric entries that would have destroyed more civilized ships. The metal showed signs of repeated repair and reinforcement, as if the vessel regularly sustained damage that would be considered catastrophic by galactic standards. A ramp extended from the ship with a series of mechanical clanks and whirs that made several of the more sensitive species wince. The sound was harsh, industrial, completely unlike the whisper-quiet technology that dominated galactic civilization. It was the sound of machinery built to function under impossible conditions, constructed by beings who had never known the luxury of gentle environments. The first figure to emerge was clearly not the human. Ambassador, a distinguished member of the Galactic Education Council, descended the ramp with the fluid grace typical of his aquatic species. His expression was difficult to read behind his environmental suit, but the way his tentacles moved suggested extreme agitation. Director, Ambassador's voice came through the communication system with a slight tremor. I must warn you, the journey has been educational. The human's casual attitude toward what we consider mortal danger is deeply disturbing. During our passage through the nebular storms, while my crew was preparing for emergency procedures, the human asked if we could fly closer to observe the electromagnetic phenomena. Before could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from within the ship. The sound was deliberate, purposeful, unlike the soft padding or gliding motions of most galactic species. Each step seemed to announce the presence of something that was used to making its will known through force if necessary. The human emerged from the shadows of the transport, and the assembled crowd fell silent. The creature was smaller than expected, standing roughly 2 meters in height, not particularly impressive by galactic standards. But there was something about the way it moved that immediately commanded attention. Where other species flowed or drifted, the human walked with a predatory confidence that spoke of countless generations spent at the top of a brutal food chain. Its skin was a warm brown color, unmarked by the protective scaling or carapaces that most intelligent species had evolved. Instead, it wore simple clothing that appeared to be made from organic fibers, a shocking display of confidence in its own durability. The human's face was asymmetrical yet oddly appealing, with forward-facing eyes that marked it unmistakably as a hunter species. But it was the eyes themselves that truly unsettled the gathered crowd. They moved constantly, taking in every detail of the docking bay with the calculating precision of a predator assessing its environment. When the human's gaze swept across the assembled aliens, several of them involuntarily stepped backward, despite their rational knowledge that they were safe. "Wow," the human said, and its voice carried easily across the chamber without any technological assistance. The sound was rich and complex, full of harmonics that suggested a sophisticated communication system evolved for coordination during hunts. "This place is incredible. The architecture is amazing. Is that a gravitational suspension system for the upper platforms? And the bioluminescent panels for navigation, that's brilliant, much more elegant than our LED systems." The casual tone was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of all. Here was a creature from a death world, surrounded by species that it could presumably kill without effort, expressing genuine appreciation for aesthetic details. It suggested either an incredible level of confidence or a complete inability to recognize danger. Neither option was particularly comforting. Ambassador moved closer to Director, his tentacles writhing with anxiety. "You see what I mean? During the journey, it spent hours studying our ship's technical specifications, asking questions about quantum field manipulation and bioneural interfaces. When I warned it that such knowledge was restricted, it laughed and said its species had developed most of the same technologies independently, but in a more robust way suitable for adverse conditions." The human continued to look around with obvious fascination, apparently oblivious to the fear it was generating. It reached into a simple bag attached to its clothing and a small device, pointing it at various architectural features. Several security officers tensed, hands moving toward their weapons, but the human seemed to be simply recording images. "I'm sorry," the creature said, noticing the reaction. "Should I have asked permission first? By the way, I'm really grateful for the opportunity to study here. My thesis advisor back home said this was the best xenobiology program in the galaxy." It extended its hand toward Director in what appeared to be some sort of greeting ritual. The appendage was clearly designed for manipulation and grasping, with long fingers that could probably exert tremendous pressure. Several of the assembled aliens gasped audibly at what appeared to be an aggressive gesture. Forced himself to remain calm, though his bioluminescent patches flickered with involuntary stress patterns. "Welcome to the Galactic Academy of Earth. I am Director. We have prepared special accommodations for your unique biological requirements." "That's very kind of you," the human replied, lowering its hand when it became clear the gesture wouldn't be returned. "Though honestly, the environment here seems pretty comfortable already. The gravity is a bit light, and the air mixture is a little rich in oxygen for my taste, but nothing I can't adapt to. On Earth, we're used to dealing with much wider variations." This casual dismissal of what the Academy considered careful environmental planning sent another wave of unease through the crowd. The atmospheric composition had been precisely calculated to avoid causing the human respiratory distress. The gravity had been adjusted to prevent structural damage to its presumably fragile bone structure. Yet the creature spoke of these accommodations as minor conveniences. "If you would follow me," said, gesturing toward the exit, "we can begin your orientation process. There are many safety protocols we need to discuss before you can begin attending classes." "Safety protocols?" The human's face arranged itself into an expression that might have been amusement. "Are we talking about lab safety, chemical handling procedures, radiation shielding requirements? Because I have to say, the background radiation levels here are incredibly low compared to what I'm used to." Ambassador's environmental suit began making soft warning chimes as his stress levels elevated beyond safe parameters. "Director, perhaps we should discuss the human's transportation to its quarters. During our journey, it expressed interest in walking rather than using our standard gravity-assisted movement systems. When I explained that the distance was over 3 kilometers, it seemed confused by our concern. "Walking is good exercise," said cheerfully. "Besides, I'd love to see more of the academy. The little glimpse I got from space was incredible. Is that really a living structure? How do you maintain the biological systems at that scale? And the energy distribution network, is that based on bioelectrical conduction or some kind of quantum field manipulation?" The rapid-fire technical questions, delivered in the same casual tone used for small talk, highlighted another disturbing aspect of the human's presence. Its casual familiarity with concepts that required years of specialized education suggested an intellectual capacity that matched its physical capabilities. A species that was both scientifically advanced and physically dangerous was precisely the kind of combination that had historically led to galactic catastrophes. As the group began moving toward the Academy's interior, other students and faculty members gathered in the corridors to catch a glimpse of the legendary death. The humans seemed oblivious to the attention, continuing to point at various architectural features and ask complex technical questions about their construction and operation. "The bioneural networks running through the walls," observed. "They're using a glucose-based energy system, right? That's fascinating. We experimented with similar approaches on Earth, but our organisms tend to be more robust, so we ended up going with different solutions. Have you tried using redundant pathways to prevent cascade failures?" Translator implants struggled with some of the technical terminology, suggesting that the human was describing concepts that didn't have direct equivalents in galactic standard languages. This implied either that Earth's scientific development had followed unique pathways, or that it had advanced beyond galactic standards in certain areas. They passed through the central atrium, where massive transparent barriers held back the vacuum of space and provided a spectacular view of the surrounding star systems. Most species found the sight overwhelming, a reminder of the vast emptiness that surrounded their small bubble of life and civilization. The human stopped dead in its tracks, staring out at the cosmic vista with an expression of pure wonder. For a moment, the predatory alertness faded from its features, replaced by something approaching reverence. "Beautiful," it whispered, and for the first time since its arrival, the creature seemed truly alien. Most species feared the void, seeing it as a hostile emptiness that sought to destroy all life. But the human looked upon it with the same appreciation it had shown for the Academy's architecture, as if it saw beauty in the very danger that terrified other civilized beings. The moment passed, and the human's attention returned to its immediate surroundings. The structural engineering must be incredible to maintain atmosphere against that pressure differential, and the transparent barriers, some kind of force field system or an actual physical material. The clarity is amazing. "Crystalline carbon composite," found himself answering, despite his growing concern about the human's capabilities. "Grown using bio-directed molecular assembly over a period of several years." "Impressive. We use similar techniques on Earth, but our methods are faster and more energy-intensive. Trade-off between speed and precision, I suppose. Different environmental pressures lead to different solutions." The casual mention of advanced manufacturing techniques was another reminder that this creature came from a world where such technologies had been developed under the extreme conditions that define Deathworlds. The implications were staggering. If Earth's technology was designed to function under impossible conditions, what would happen when it was applied in normal galactic environments? As they continued through the Academy's corridors, the human's presence began to attract more attention. Students pressed against the walls, trying to get a better look at the legendary death while maintaining what they hoped was a safe distance. Faculty members abandoned their classes to witness the unprecedented sight of a human walking calmly through their institution. The human seemed genuinely puzzled by the reaction. "Is there something wrong?" it asked. "Did I commit some kind of cultural error? I know etiquette can be tricky." "No error," assured it, though his bioluminescent patches continued their anxious flickering. "Your arrival has generated considerable interest among the academic community. Humans are not common in galactic society." "Understandable. We're still pretty new to interstellar travel. Most of our energy goes into just surviving on Earth and developing the technology to get off-planet. But I have to say, everyone here seems really nervous. Are death typically dangerous to other species?" The innocent way the human asked the question sent a chill through the assembled group. It genuinely seemed unaware of the fear it was generating, which somehow made it even more terrifying. A creature that didn't understand its own capacity for destruction was far more dangerous than one that actively sought to harm others. They reached the residential section of the academy, where the humans' quarters had been specially prepared. The room was larger than standard, with reinforced walls and emergency containment systems discreetly hidden behind decorative panels. The atmospheric controls were more sophisticated than anything used for other species, capable of rapidly adjusting composition and pressure in response to perceived threats. "This is very nice," said, examining the space with obvious appreciation. "Much more comfortable than my dorm back on Earth. The gravity feels a little light, but I'm sure I'll adjust. Is there a gymnasium or exercise facility? I like to stay in shape." The request for exercise facilities triggered another wave of concern among the academy staff. The idea of a death deliberately engaging in physical conditioning was deeply unsettling. Most species considered their baseline physical condition adequate for all necessary activities. The concept of voluntarily subjecting oneself to additional stress for the purpose of becoming stronger was almost incomprehensible. "We have recreational facilities," said carefully. "Though they are designed for the physical capabilities of standard galactic species, we may need to make special arrangements for your requirements." "That's okay. I brought some portable equipment with me. Nothing too elaborate, just some resistance bands and body weight exercise routines. I find that staying active helps me think more clearly." The human opened its travel bag and began removing items that looked like simple strips of flexible material. When it demonstrated the elastic properties by stretching one of the bands, several observers stepped backward involuntarily. The casual way the creature handled objects that could apparently store and release significant amounts of energy was yet another reminder of its dangerous capabilities. "I should probably mention," continued conversationally, "I'm planning to major in xenobiology with a focus on evolutionary adaptation. My particular interest is in how different species develop under various environmental pressures. Earth is a pretty extreme environment, so I'm curious to see how life evolved under more stable conditions." The irony was not lost on anyone present. The creature from the most hostile environment in known space wanted to study how other species had adapted to their stable conditions. It was like an apex predator expressing academic interest in the survival strategies of prey animals. As the orientation continued, it became increasingly clear that the humans' presence at the academy would challenge every assumption about death worlds and their inhabitants. The creature was intelligent, curious, and apparently peaceful, but its casual attitude toward conditions that would kill most galactic citizens suggested capabilities that were difficult to comprehend. The first day was drawing to a close, and already the Academy's carefully ordered existence had been turned upside down by the arrival of a single human. Students whispered in corridors about the death in their midst, faculty members frantically revised safety protocols, and administrators tried to figure out how to accommodate a being whose very existence challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization. But oblivious to the chaos he had created, simply unpacked his belongings and prepared for his first day of classes, excited to begin his studies at the galaxy's most prestigious academic institution. The real surprises were yet to come. The morning alarm resonated through the academy at precisely 700 Galactic Standard Time, a gentle melodic tone designed to ease students into consciousness without causing stress. Most species required a gradual awakening process, as sudden alertness could trigger panic responses in creatures evolved from prey animals. Had been awake for over an hour. The human's biological rhythm apparently didn't align with the carefully calculated sleep cycles that worked for 97% of galactic species. When maintenance crews made their routine rounds, they found the human in his quarters performing a series of movements that could only be described as voluntary physical stress. He was pushing his body weight up and down using his arms, performing what he called push-ups with mechanical precision. The maintenance supervisor, a cautious named observed through the monitoring system with growing alarm. The human's cardiovascular system was operating at elevated levels, his skin secreting water as a cooling mechanism, and his breathing was rapid and controlled. By all medical standards, the creature appeared to be in severe distress. "Should we alert the medical team?" asked his assistant, tentacles quivering with concern. Wait, A replied, studying the readings more carefully. Look at the neural activity patterns. No stress indicators, no pain responses. It appears to be enjoying itself. The concept was so foreign that it took several minutes for the implications to sink in. The human was voluntarily subjecting itself to physical strain that would incapacitate most species, and it was experiencing positive emotional responses to the process. When finished his exercise routine and began preparing for classes, he was humming, a sound that their cultural database identified as indicating contentment and well-being. Professor Eth had spent the night reviewing everything known about Deathworld psychology, trying to prepare for her first xenobiology lecture with a human student. As one of the Academy's most experienced instructors, she had taught thousands of students from dozens of species. But none of those species came from planets where the very air was toxic and the weather patterns could kill. Her lecture hall was equipped with the latest holographic display systems, capable of showing three-dimensional models of cellular structures with perfect accuracy. The material she had prepared covered basic cellular adaptation to environmental pressure, a fundamental course that every xenobiology student had to master before moving on to more advanced topics. The other students filed in with their usual quiet efficiency. There were 12, and with their gossamer wings folded carefully against their backs, 8 crystalline collective members whose translucent bodies refracted the light beautifully, and 5 massive titans whose heavy gravity evolution had given them incredible strength but slow, deliberate movements. Then walked in, and the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The human moved with that same predatory confidence that had unsettled everyone the day before, but now there was something different. Where other students chose seats based on social hierarchies or environmental preferences, simply selected a spot that offered the best view of the holographic display system and sat down without ceremony. "Good morning," he said cheerfully to the student beside him. The delicate creature's wings fluttered in panic, and it quickly moved to a seat several rows away. Professor Eth activated her bioluminescent teaching patches and began the lecture with the standard introduction to cellular adaptation theory. She explained how different environmental pressures led to evolutionary changes, using examples from various galactic ecosystems to illustrate the principles. Environmental stress, she explained, is typically something that life forms seek to avoid. Evolutionary success is measured by how effectively a species can find and maintain optimal conditions for survival and reproduction. His hand shot up immediately. Professor Eth paused, her patches flickering with uncertainty. "Yes. I'm curious about the definition of optimal conditions. On Earth, we've found that moderate environmental stress actually improves biological function. Our athletes deliberately expose themselves to stress to become stronger and faster. Our immune systems require exposure to pathogens to develop properly. Even our cognitive function improves when we face challenges rather than remaining in comfortable conditions." The statement sent a wave of shocked murmurs through the classroom. The concept that any intelligent species would deliberately seek out harmful conditions was fundamentally incomprehensible to most galactic civilizations. "That is," Professor Eth struggled for words, "highly unusual. Most species seek to minimize environmental stress to maximize survival rates." "But doesn't that lead to evolutionary stagnation?" continued, apparently unaware of the sensation he was creating. "If you remove all challenges, how do you continue to improve? On Earth, the species that thrive are the ones that actively seek out new environments and adapt to changing conditions." One of the crystalline collective students, whose name was approximately translatable as Harmony of 7 Frequencies, spoke up in their characteristic harmonic voice. "The human appears to describe a fundamentally aggressive approach to existence. Our philosophy emphasizes achieving perfect balance with environmental conditions." "I wouldn't call it aggressive," replied thoughtfully. "More like proactive. We learned early that sitting still gets you eaten. There's always something on Earth trying to kill you: disease, weather, predators, geological events, radiation from space. The only way to survive is to get stronger, smarter, and more adaptable." The casual way he listed threats that would represent existential crises for most civilizations left the classroom in stunned silence. Professor Eth realized that her carefully prepared curriculum was completely inadequate for a student who came from an environment where survival itself required constant innovation and improvement. "Perhaps," she said carefully, You could share some specific examples of how Earth life forms adapt to environmental challenges. Brightened, clearly excited to discuss his home world's biology. Oh, there are thousands of great examples. Take Arctic terns. They migrate from Arctic to Antarctic and back every year, covering over 70,000 kilometers. Or tardigrades, which can survive in space vacuum, extreme radiation, temperatures from near absolute zero to 150 degrees Celsius. They can even come back to life after being completely dehydrated for decades. The numbers he quoted were so extreme that several students activated their personal computers to verify the claims. When the data confirmed what the human had said, the mood in the classroom shifted from skeptical to genuinely frightened. "And humans?" asked one of the Titan students, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. "What are your species' adaptations?" Shrugged, a gesture that the aliens were beginning to recognize as indicating casual dismissal of something significant. "We're pretty generalized. Excellent endurance runners, we can literally chase prey to death over long distances. Good problem-solving abilities, opposable thumbs for tool use. But mostly we're just incredibly persistent. Humans are really hard to kill and even harder to keep down." Professor Eth decided to shift the lecture to safer ground. She activated the holographic display to show cellular structures from various galactic species, planning to discuss the specific adaptations that allowed life to exist in different environments. The first example was from her own species, showing the specialized photosynthetic cells that allowed them to derive nutrition from stellar radiation. "As you can see," she explained, "our cellular structure is optimized for energy efficiency in low-light conditions." "That's fascinating," said, leaning forward to study the display. "The chloroplast analogs are much more efficient than Earth plants. But what happens if you're exposed to high-intensity radiation? Do the cells have any protective mechanisms?" "High-intensity radiation would be lethal," Professor Eth replied. "Our species evolved under the gentle light of a stable star. On Earth, our plants have multiple protective systems, UV-blocking compounds, cellular repair mechanisms, even the ability to shut down temporarily during radiation events. I guess when you live under a star that periodically tries to sterilize your planet, you develop better defenses." Another uncomfortable silence fell over the classroom. The humans' casual mention of living under a star that periodically tried to sterilize the planet was perhaps the most terrifying thing anyone had heard all day. The lecture continued with Professor Eth showing examples from other species, and each time asked questions that revealed the horrifying extent of Earth's hostile environment. When she showed the pressure-resistant cells of deep-sea species, mentioned organisms on Earth that lived in conditions that would crush most space vessels. When she discussed temperature adaptation, he described Earth life forms that thrived in environments hot enough to melt metal or cold enough to freeze atmospheric gases. By the end of the class, the other students were looking at with expressions ranging from awe to terror. The human, meanwhile, seemed completely oblivious to the effect he was having. He thanked Professor Eth for the really interesting lecture and asked if there were any recommended readings about galactic evolutionary theory. As the students filed out, Professor Eth overheard fragments of their conversations. "Did you hear what it said about Arctic terns? 70,000 kilometers. I looked up tardigrades in the database. The description is disturbing. It mentioned humans chasing prey to death. What kind of hunting strategy is that?" The Crystalline Collective students were harmonizing in frequencies that indicated extreme distress, their usual perfect pitch wavering as they processed the information they had received. The Titans, despite their impressive physical capabilities, were discussing whether their own should be reclassified as a gentle world compared to Earth. Next class was Applied Physics with Professor, a distinguished member of the Unified Field Theory Institute. The classroom was equipped with sophisticated equipment for demonstrating quantum phenomena, gravitational manipulation, and energy field interactions. Professor had heard about the disruption in the xenobiology class, so he decided to start with a simple demonstration that should be within any student's comfort zone. He activated a gravity manipulation field that reduced the local gravitational constant by 50%. "As you can see," he explained to the mixed class of students, "reducing gravitational pressure allows for more efficient movement and reduced energy expenditure." Most of the students reacted as expected, moving with the slightly floating gait that indicated their bodies were adapting to the changed conditions. A few of the more delicate species sighed with relief as the stress on their structural systems decreased. However, immediately began bouncing. "This is amazing," he exclaimed, launching himself nearly to the ceiling with what appeared to be a casual jump. "It's like being on Luna but with better atmosphere." "Luna?" Professor asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. "One of our planet's moons. Humans have been living and working there for decades. The low gravity makes construction projects much easier, though you have to be careful not to accidentally jump too hard and launch yourself into a wall." The casual mentioned that humans had not only survived on their death world, but had expanded to other celestial bodies, sent another shock through the classroom. Most species considered interplanetary colonization to be the ultimate expression of technological advancement, achieved only after centuries of careful preparation. Humans apparently treated it as a routine construction project. Professor decided to increase the complexity of the demonstration. He activated a field that simulated the gravitational conditions of a heavy world, not enough to be dangerous, but sufficient to challenge students' understanding of how physical laws affected everyday existence. Most students struggled visibly with the increased gravity, their movements becoming slow and labored. Some of the more delicate species activated personal assistance fields to help them cope with the additional stress. His reaction was completely different. He seemed to settle into the increased gravity like it was a comfortable chair, his movements becoming more controlled and precise. "Oh, this is nice," he said with obvious satisfaction. "It's almost like Earth standard, makes you feel more grounded." "This is 3 times galactic standard gravity," Professor pointed out. "Right, so it's about 80% of Earth normal, really comfortable for long-term work." Began moving around the classroom, demonstrating what he called proper heavy gravity walking technique to a group of increasingly horrified alien students. The physics lesson devolved into an impromptu seminar on death world survival techniques, with cheerfully explaining how humans had developed technologies and techniques for surviving in conditions that would instantly kill most galactic species. He described pressure suits that could withstand the crushing depths of Earth's oceans, vehicles that could operate in temperatures that would freeze the atmosphere, and construction techniques that could build structures capable of surviving earthquakes that would level most galactic cities. By lunchtime, word had spread throughout the academy about the humans' casual revelations. Students gathered in the dining halls, sharing increasingly incredible stories about the death's comments in class. The administration was receiving reports from faculty members who were questioning whether their entire curriculum needed to be revised to account for a student whose baseline assumptions about existence were completely incompatible with galactic norms. Himself remained oblivious to the growing legend surrounding his presence. He approached the dining hall with the same cheerful curiosity he had shown for everything else, interested in trying alien cuisine and meeting more of his fellow students. The dining hall fell silent when he entered. Hundreds of students from dozens of species stopped eating and turned to stare at the legendary death. Conversations that had been animated moments before died away as everyone tried to get a look at the creature that had turned their academic world upside down in the space of a single morning. Looked around the silent dining hall, his expression showing mild confusion at the attention. He selected a meal that seemed to consist of various plant-based nutrients arranged in aesthetic patterns, found an empty table, and sat down to eat. Slowly, conversations began to resume, but now they were all focused on the human. Students pointed discreetly and whispered to each other about the incredible things they had heard. Faculty members huddled together, discussing the implications of having a student whose very existence challenged fundamental assumptions about life in the galaxy. A small group of the more adventurous students gradually worked up the courage to approach the table. They were led by Junior, a young member of the same species as the ambassador who had transported the human to the academy. "Excuse me," Junior said nervously, his tentacles curled tightly against his body in a defensive posture. "We were wondering if you could tell us more about Earth. Your world sounds very interesting." Looked up from his meal with a genuine smile. "Oh, absolutely. I love talking about Earth. What would you like to know?" The simple question opened floodgates of curiosity that had been building since the humans' arrival. Students pressed closer, abandoning their own meals to hear first-hand accounts of life on a death world. "Is it true that your star produces lethal radiation?" asked a crystalline collective member. "Well, UV radiation can cause cancer if you don't protect yourself," replied matter-of-factly. "But we have ozone layers that filter most of it out, and we've developed sunscreen and protective clothing for high-exposure situations. Some humans even seek out sun exposure because it helps our bodies produce vitamin D." The concept that any species would voluntarily expose itself to carcinogenic radiation for health benefits was so alien that several students had to activate their translation systems to make sure they had understood correctly. "What about the predators you mentioned?" asked Diane, his wings trembling with sympathetic fear. "Oh, there are lots of those. Bears, wolves, big cats, sharks, crocodiles, venomous snakes, and spiders. But most of them leave humans alone unless you do something stupid. And we've learned to coexist pretty well: conservation programs, protective legislation, that sort of thing. Actually, some of our most popular recreational activities involve going into wilderness areas specifically to observe dangerous wildlife." The idea that humans would voluntarily enter the territories of lethal predators for entertainment purposes was perhaps the most incomprehensible thing the students had heard yet. Most galactic species had eliminated dangerous fauna from there ago as a basic safety measure. The questions continued for over an hour, with cheerfully describing aspects of Earth that would be classified as existential threats by galactic standards. He talked about hurricane-force winds that humans weathered in specially designed shelters, volcanic eruptions that they monitored and studied at close range, and ocean environments where the pressure would implode most galactic vehicles. Each answer revealed new layers of the impossible world that had produced this seemingly gentle, curious creature. The students began to understand that everything they had assumed about the relationship between environment and life was completely wrong. Earth wasn't just a hostile world that had somehow produced intelligent life. It was a world so hostile that it had forged a species capable of thriving in conditions that most galactic citizens couldn't even imagine. As the lunch period drew to a close, the dining hall had transformed into an impromptu lecture theater, with students from every department gathering to hear the humans' descriptions of his. The afternoon's classes would be disrupted as professors found their students distracted by thoughts of a world where intelligence had evolved not despite extreme danger, but because of it. The real revelation was still to come: the afternoon laboratory session, where the academy's students would discover exactly what kind of routine safety procedures a death considered normal. The Advanced Biochemistry Laboratory was the pride of the Galactic Academy, featuring state-of-the-art safety systems designed to protect students from the minute traces of hazardous materials required for their experiments. Multiple containment fields, atmospheric purification systems, and emergency medical protocols ensured that even the most delicate species could work safely with substances that might cause minor irritation upon extended exposure. Professor Ra, head of the biochemistry department, had spent considerable time preparing for the afternoon's laboratory session. The experiment was designed to be completely safe. Students would be working with diluted enzyme solutions to observe basic catalytic reactions. The concentrations were so mild that accidental ingestion would cause nothing more serious than temporary digestive upset in most species. The safety briefing alone typically took 30 minutes, as Professor Ra carefully explained the proper handling procedures for each chemical, the emergency protocols for various scenarios, and the importance of wearing full protective equipment at all times. Arrived early, as had become his pattern, and began examining the laboratory equipment with obvious interest. The other students filed in wearing the standard protective gear: full-body suits with independent atmospheric systems, reinforced gloves, and impact-resistant face shields. Was wearing safety glasses. "Mr. Professor Ra said carefully, you'll need to don proper protective equipment before we can begin the laboratory session." "Oh, sure," replied, pulling on a pair of thin gloves. "Is this a high-hazard experiment? The material safety sheets I reviewed suggested pretty mild risk levels." Professor Ra's gill slits fluttered with confusion. "You reviewed the safety documentation?" "Of course, basic lab safety, right? I noticed the chemical concentrations are much lower than we typically use on Earth, but I figure that's probably appropriate for an introductory course." The casual mentioned that Earth laboratories routinely used higher concentrations of hazardous materials than the Academy considered safe for advanced students sent the now familiar wave of unease through the assembled group. The protective equipment, Professor Raw pressed gently, looked around at his fellow students, encased in their elaborate safety suits, then down at his own minimal protection. Am I underdressed for this? I mean, we're working with pretty dilute solutions here. On Earth, this would be considered safe for unsupervised undergraduate work. The statement that Deathworld students were allowed to work unsupervised with materials that required full environmental protection in galactic laboratories was so shocking that several students activated their emergency transponders, thinking they might have misheard. Professor Ra decided to proceed with the standard safety briefing, hoping that the human would understand the seriousness of the situation once the proper protocols were explained. Today we will be working with a 0.001 molar solution of catalytic enzymes, she began. These materials can cause cellular irritation if they come into direct contact with biological tissue. In the event of accidental exposure, immediately flush the affected area with neutralizing solution and activate emergency medical protocols. Raised his hand. What's the LD50 on these enzymes? The what? Professor Ra's translator implant struggled with the unfamiliar term. Lethal dose 50, the amount that would be lethal to 50% of a test population. I'm trying to gauge the actual risk level here. The concept that anyone would want to know the lethal dose of materials they were working with was so alien that it took several minutes for Professor Ra to understand what the human was asking. Most species preferred not to think about the potential lethality of laboratory materials, focusing instead on avoidance and protection. We don't typically calculate such measures, she admitted. Our safety protocols are designed to prevent any exposure whatsoever. Ah, okay, ultra-conservative approach. That makes sense for a mixed species environment where you can't predict individual physiological responses, nodded approvingly. What's the standard first aid protocol if someone does get exposed? The question prompted Professor Ra to launch into a detailed explanation of the Academy's emergency medical procedures. Immediate containment, full decontamination, transport to medical facilities, and several days of observation to monitor for delayed reactions. Several days, looked puzzled. For enzyme exposure, I mean unless there's an allergic reaction, wouldn't basic washing and maybe some antihistamines cover it? Antihistamines. Common medication on Earth. We use them for allergic reactions, insect bites, mild chemical exposures, that sort of thing. Most humans have them in their personal medical kits. The casual mention that humans carried personal medical supplies for treating chemical exposures was another reminder of the hostile environment they came from. Most galactic species had never experienced chemical exposure severe enough to require medical intervention. The laboratory session began with Professor Ra demonstrating the proper technique for handling the enzyme solutions. She worked inside a sealed containment field, using robotic manipulators to measure precise quantities of the materials while monitoring atmospheric readings for any sign of contamination. Watched the demonstration with growing confusion. Professor, are we working with volatile compounds? The containment seems pretty extensive for non-volatile aqueous solutions. These are highly dangerous materials, Professor Ra explained patiently. Even microscopic amounts could cause serious harm if mishandled. But they're enzymes, replied, genuine confusion in his voice. Biological catalysts. Most of them are probably analogous to compounds that already exist in our digestive systems or metabolic pathways. The statement that humans routinely produced substances internally that the Academy considered laboratory hazards was so disturbing that several students excused themselves from the session. When it came time for the students to perform their own experiments, the differences between species became even more apparent. The galactic students worked with painstaking care, using multiple layers of containment and spending several minutes on each measurement to ensure perfect safety. Approached his workstation and began working with the casual efficiency of someone completely comfortable with laboratory procedures. He pipetted solutions, mixed reagents, and recorded observations with practiced ease, treating the dangerous materials like the routine laboratory supplies they would be on Earth. Mister, Professor Ra called nervously, please ensure you're following proper containment protocols. Oh, absolutely, replied, carefully sealing a test tube. Though I have to say, this is probably the safest lab environment I've ever worked in. The fume extraction system alone is incredible, much more sophisticated than anything we have on Earth. More sophisticated than Earth laboratories? Asked, a Titan student whose massive frame was enclosed in an environmental suit that resembled a small spacecraft. Oh, definitely. Most of our labs are just rooms with good ventilation and emergency showers. We rely more on training and common sense than environmental controls. Continued his work while talking, multitasking in a way that terrified his fellow students. Of course, Earth chemicals tend to be a bit more aggressive than what you're using here. More aggressive, Professor Ra's voice carried a note of dread. Well, stronger acids and bases, higher concentrations, more reactive compounds. We work with materials that can dissolve metal, explode on contact with water, or produce toxic gases. But that's what you need when your planet keeps trying to kill you. You develop chemistry that can fight back. The revelation that Earth possessed chemical weapons capable of fighting their planet's environment was terrifying enough. But the casual way described working with such materials suggested that exposure to potentially lethal substances was routine for his species. As the laboratory session continued, his competence with procedures that stressed his classmates became increasingly apparent. He completed his assigned experiments quickly and accurately, then began exploring additional procedures that interested him. Professor, he called, would it be possible to try running this reaction at higher concentrations? I'm curious about the kinetics at more realistic levels. Higher concentrations would be extremely dangerous, Professor Ra replied immediately. How much higher are we talking? Double, 10 times? I've worked with enzyme concentrations up to molar strength before. Paused his work to look around the laboratory. Actually, do you have any equipment for handling really hazardous materials, fuming acids, reactive metals, that sort of thing? We have a specialized containment facility for advanced graduate work, Professor Ra admitted reluctantly. Cool, what kind of containment ratings? Can it handle materials that are explosive, corrosive, and toxic simultaneously? The question was so far outside normal academic experience that Professor Ra had to consult her reference materials to even understand what the human was asking. The Academy's most advanced containment systems were designed to handle materials that might cause discomfort to sensitive species. The idea that anyone would want to work with substances that combined multiple catastrophic hazards was completely beyond their experience. Mister, she said carefully, what exactly do you intend to study during your time here? Brightened with enthusiasm. I'm really interested in extremophile biochemistry organisms that thrive in impossible conditions. Earth has some fascinating examples. Bacteria that live in boiling acid, organisms that eat radiation, microbes that survive in the vacuum of space. I want to understand how life adapts to environments that should be instantly lethal. The description of Earth's extremophile organisms as examples of impossible survival was particularly disturbing, since the conditions described as impossible were actually less extreme than the normal environment on his. As the laboratory session concluded, Professor Ra found herself facing a dilemma that no academy instructor had ever encountered. She had a student whose casual competence with dangerous materials far exceeded her own, who came from a world where advanced chemistry was apparently necessary for basic survival, and who wanted to study life forms that made galactic civilizations' worst nightmares look tame by comparison. The other students cleaned their workstations with elaborate decontamination procedures, sealed their waste materials in multiple containment systems, and underwent full medical scans to ensure they hadn't been exposed to harmful substances. Rinsed his glassware in the sink, wiped down his workbench with a cleaning cloth, and disposed of his materials in the standard waste containers. Thanks for a great lab session, he told Professor Ra cheerfully. The equipment here is really impressive. I'm looking forward to the advanced courses. As the students filed out, Professor Ra overheard their conversations. Did you see how it handled those materials? No containment field, no protective equipment. It said it wanted to work with substances that are explosive and corrosive and toxic. What kind of world produces organisms that eat radiation? The crystalline collective students were harmonizing in frequencies that indicated they were processing information too disturbing for normal communication. The ants had clustered together, their gossamer wings vibrating with shared anxiety. But perhaps the most telling reaction came from the Titan students. Despite their impressive physical capabilities and evolutionary history on a heavy-gravity world, they were discussing whether Earth should be classified not merely as a death world, but as something entirely outside the normal parameters of galactic civilization. Word of the laboratory session spread through the Academy's communication networks with unprecedented speed. Faculty members began messaging each other, sharing increasingly incredible reports about the humans' casual competence with procedures that challenged their most advanced students. Director found himself inundated with requests from faculty members asking for guidance on how to handle a student whose baseline assumptions about safety, danger, and academic rigor were completely incompatible with galactic norms. But the most disturbing reports came from the xenobiology department, where Professor Eth had begun researching Earth's biological systems in detail. Her preliminary findings suggested that descriptions of his had been, if anything, understated. Earth wasn't just a death world. It was a planet so hostile that it had produced a species capable of turning environmental dangers into academic curiosities. The implications were staggering. If humans could casually handle laboratory procedures that stressed galactic students, what would happen when they began applying their problem-solving abilities to galactic technology and science? As the first day of classes came to an end, the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences faced a crisis that no educational institution in the galaxy had ever confronted. They had enrolled a student whose very presence challenged every assumption about the relationship between environment, evolution, and intelligence. Meanwhile, was in his quarters reviewing his notes from the day's classes and planning his research projects. He sent a message back to Earth describing the Academy as incredible, the most advanced research facilities I've ever seen, though they're surprisingly cautious about basic laboratory procedures. He mentioned that his fellow students seemed really nervous about everything, but attributed it to the normal adjustment period that anyone would experience in a new academic environment. The human remained completely oblivious to the fact that his first day at the academy had fundamentally changed, how an entire civilization understood the relationship between intelligence and survival. Tomorrow would begin his advanced courses, where he would encounter galactic technology, scientific theories, and research methodologies that had been developed over of careful, cautious progress by species that had never known real danger. The results would reshape galactic science forever. But that night, as slept peacefully in quarters designed to contain a potentially dangerous alien creature, the faculty and administration of the Galactic Academy stayed awake, frantically trying to figure out how to educate a being whose casual existence challenged everything they thought they knew about life in the universe. The humans' education was just beginning, but already it was clear that the Academy would learn far more from than he would ever learn from them. The question that kept the administration awake was whether galactic civilization was prepared for the changes that such knowledge would bring. The answer, as events would soon prove, was that nothing in the galaxy could have prepared them for the gentle, curious death who had walked into their lives and casually revolutionized their understanding of what it meant to be alive in a dangerous universe.